I'm Insomniac, and this is the 32 Degrees Blacktip.
Who are you?
Insomniac. Now before I get started, I'd like to give a big shout out to Jim Berry. You probably noticed in the very beginning of this video that there was an actual unboxing, peeling the plastic off, the whole nine. That's because Jim ordered this watch, sent it right to me to be reviewed before I ship it to him. Very cool, thank you very much. And as a side note for any of you out there who are thinking of doing the same thing, if you have any watches, new or used, you would like to see reviewed on this channel and then shipped back to you, email me at shoulditimethis@gmail.com and we'll set that up. Alright, let's get into the watch. The main body of the case is finished in brushed stainless steel, while the screw-down case back and outer edge of the bezel are polished stainless steel. The overall shape of the case and machining are just okay. Nothing special, but nothing really sloppy either. I can't say that I love the case though, because the first adjective that came to mind when I put it on my wrist was chunky. The body of the case is thicker than it really needs to be, and proportionately the bracelet makes this watch look and feel a bit bigger than it is, because the company went with a 22mm lug width that you'd find on most dive watches of even smaller diameters, which makes the lugs look thicker than they need to be, and in my opinion slightly exaggerate the large diameter of the case. The bezel on this watch is another shortcoming. The bezel insert is very plain and generic, and the grooves around the outer edge of the bezel just aren't very grippy. Add that to a generally cheap and light feel to the turn of the unidirectional bezel, an overblown raised dot at the 12 that, as you'll see later, doesn't really charge with the rest of the lume, and the bit of play that you have in either direction when the bezel is in any position, and it becomes easy to see that this watch actually wouldn't be a great tool for diving. Not that too many people actually use cheaper pieces to time dives, but you get the point. One positive though here is the crown. It's large, but so is the watch. It looks right proportionally with this watch and has the company logo lightly engraved on it, has fairly good grip to it for easy manipulation when making adjustments, and it's a screw down crown, which obviously makes it a lot more trustworthy for water resistance. The dial on the 32 Degrees Blacktip, well, it just looks cheap. The main surface of the dial is probably plastic. If it isn't, it sure looks like plastic, and that's a problem in terms of giving you a quality feeling when you look down at your watch. The center section of the dial has a decent looking wave pattern, but the outer section where the indices are has these circular grooves that just look like plastic. The furthest edge of the dial has an angled kind of chapter ring, but even that doesn't really have a quality brushed stainless look to it. It almost looks more like the inside of an aluminum soda can. The size and shape of the indices for the hours are pretty good. All of them have a fair polished outer edge and are filled with lume. The hands on this watch are either great or terrible depending on your personal aesthetic preferences. The length of the hands is very good for the size of the dial, and the second hand is a normal shape that you see on a lot of dive watches, but the odd shape and design of the minute and hour hands, although moderately unique, are pretty damn ugly in my opinion. Last, you have the logos and printing at the center of the dial. First of all, I honestly can't tell if they're just the thinnest applied logos I've ever seen, or if they're printed on the dial, or if they're decals of some sort. Second, the text is standard and doesn't bother me, and I actually really like the little shark logo above the 6 o'clock index, but the company's 32 Degrees logo just looks cheesy to me. Reminds me of something you'd see on a kid's toy. So it's a large dial and the main focal point of the watch, but for me it isn't one that really looks like quality, which is a shame. This watch only has one complication, and that would be the date window at 3 o'clock. It's a black numeral on a white disc, which looks okay on this dial. Personally, I think it would have been a lot cleaner as a white numeral on a black disc in that position, but it's not a big deal. What is kind of a big deal is that it's a tiny date window, so to make the read of the date easier for you, 32 Degrees added a Cyclops to the mineral crystal, and not unlike with most Cyclops magnifiers, it's super easy to read the date when you're looking straight through it, but only if you're looking completely straight down through it. Otherwise, the date actually isn't viewable from just about any other angle when it's on the wrist. The lume on this watch actually isn't too bad. It doesn't last too long, but there are two big positives here. One, the large lume filled areas all glow evenly when charged, and two, the lume filling is fairly sensitive to light, which is actually something that can't be said for many watches. What I mean there is that it picks up light pretty well, even standard light from just being inside in a bright room. When you step into a dark room or outside on a dark night, you can read the time pretty easily. The two negatives are, number one, the giant marker on the bezel up at the 12 doesn't seem to charge at all with a standard light source and barely with a purposed lume charge, and two, the lume filling in the indices seem to carry a stronger, brighter charge than in the hands, so it's inconsistent there in terms of visual continuity. Time at a glance on this piece is almost perfect. The indices for the hours are big and all of the large lume-filled surfaces on the hands and hour markers are white, which contrasts flawlessly against the black dial. Where it loses a couple of points is with the finer read of the time in terms of minutes. The minute indices are easy enough to find on that angled outer chapter ring, but they're so much smaller and set back so much further than the hour indices that you do have to look closer to tell exactly what minute the hand is pointing at. Pretty good overall though. Normally with the quartz watches is a simple perfect score, being that, as most of you know, quartz watches are generally more accurate, almost perfectly accurate when compared to most mechanical watches. But in this case there are two minor negatives. One of those is accuracy. It's not a train wreck, it's not like the watch is running a minute fast every day, but I was surprised to see that after 5 days since setting the watch, the time was behind by about a minute. That's only a loss of about 10 to 12 seconds per day, but that's actually pretty surprising for a Swiss-made quartz movement. Then there's the look of the movement. It looks fairly solid while running, but I do notice some springiness to the stop of the second hand in some positions, and not unlike with most deadbeat second hands, the tip of the second hand rarely ever stops dead on center with the applied markers on the outer edge. So while more than accurate enough to achieve a watch's core function, which is to tell the time, it's not as good as I think it should be for a Swiss-made quartz movement. The bracelet on this watch is a standard 3-link design, although it looks like a 4-link bracelet with that groove going down the center. The outer links are brushed stainless and the inners are polished. Aesthetically, the bracelet looks okay. I think that groove in the center actually cheapens the look a little bit, and although the bracelet looks good enough, as mentioned earlier in the review, it's 22mm at the lugs, tapering down to only 20mm by the clasp, which is narrow enough to feel comfortable on the wrist, but not wide enough to look proportionately balanced with the massive case. Then there's the clasp. I appreciate the fact that there are fine adjusters here to help you get the size right, and I like the fact that it's a double locking clasp, but the 32 degrees logo is cheaply engraved in the outer lock, and when using the clasp, it does feel a bit flimsy and cheap. With that said though, I've found this bracelet to be fairly comfortable and haven't had any issues with the clasp coming undone, so it does the job pretty well. Last we have value. Now despite some of the things that I don't like about this watch personally, there is obviously definitely a large market for large dive style watches. Most people don't use them for diving, but they seem to be a popular choice for robust work watches or beater watches with a rugged aesthetic and fairly neutral design. And this watch really isn't bad in terms of its core functions. It keeps time fairly accurately, it feels pretty solid, it's pretty comfortable on the wrist. The giant problem with this piece is the price. A fairly generic looking dive watch from a company I've never heard of with a quartz movement. I figured I'd see this all over the internet for a steal. But as of the time of this review, the only site that I could find this for sale on is actually Amazon, so you're probably thinking, well, probably a pretty good deal there. Usually you can catch some of the cheapest deals on Amazon. But this watch on Amazon is $249.50. That's insane. Not only are there plenty of quartz divers to be had for a lot less money than that, but I can actually think of a good handful of mechanical dive watches for about $250 or under that are obviously far better watches than this one. So sadly, unless you find this watch on another site or somewhere in store for a lot less money, I really don't think this is a very good value. Well, again, another big shout out to Jim Berry for sending this in, very much appreciated. If you're enjoying these reviews and you want to see a lot more of them, and you would like to help support the channel and keep this going, sign up at the link at the top of the video description, support on Patreon, that would be a big help. And I'll have many more watch reviews coming your way soon, so subscribe, hit the notifications button, all that fun stuff, and I will see you soon.